They say the West swallows everything: hope, sin, screams, even promises. But that night, the sky did the swallowing. It started with thunder and ended in silence. And somewhere in the middle was a little girl, all alone, in a light dress, barefoot, with her mama's name stuck in her throat. The storm started like any other slow, with dark clouds creeping across the hills like black snakes. The wind came first, then the crack of lightning, slicing the sky like a blade. The rain fell hard, drowning the ground, burying trails, washing away footprints inside a crooked little cabin on the edge of Bishop's Valley. There were just two souls, the girl and her mother. The father had died 2 winters ago, taken by fever from a bad well. All he left behind was a hat that smelled of horse sweat and the silence he'd carved into his wife's eyes. Ellie's mother did what she could. She sewed dresses for town ladies, scrubbed floors, took scraps from markets. Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she cried. Most nights they fell asleep holding hands, but that night the rain didn't just knock on the windows. It came in. A bolt of lightning struck too close. The beams groaned like an old ox going down. A shout, a crack, the ceiling gave way. Her mama shoved Ellie hard toward the far wall. -darkness.rs. Later, maybe just minutes, Ellie never could tell, she woke under a broken table. Smoke in the air, wet wood, and blood. Her mama lay on the floor, eyes open, but seeing nothing. The sound of the rain was just noise now, a background hum, behind a kind of pain that had no voice. The girl didn't cry. She just lay there, forehead pressed against her mother's arm. Then she stood, tied her mama's handkerchief in her hair, and walked east, toward where the sky was turning pale. That's how the crossing began. Ellie wasn't one to talk. Much she'd learned early that words don't change what's already broken. So she just walked, with her head low, feet bleeding, and the smell of lavender still clinging to her memory. She walked past 2 creeks, a long abandoned graveyard, in a town called Red Bluff, where no one saw her. She tried to ask for bread at a store once. The woman behind the counter just said, "We don't give 2 strays." Shut the door. Ellie didn't knock again. She kept walking, always quiet, always with the storm still alive in her shoulders. By the morning of the 4th day, the sun came out, faint, shy, but enough to reveal the rusted fence of a forgotten ranch. Ellie saw the horses first 2, maybe 3 grazing near a worn-down barn. Then she saw him. A man stood on the porch, scratching his beard with one hand, holding a tin cup in the other. His hat hung low over his face, and his long coat was faded by years of dust and rain. He didn't look scary, but he didn't look like a man who talked to children either. Ellie stopped just outside the fence. Arms hung limp at her sides. Her dress was torn. Her eyes were dry like they'd forgotten how to cry. She stood there, said nothing, just ... stood, like she was waiting for the ranch to swallow her up the way the rest of the world had. The man didn't move. He just looked. The wind stirred little clouds of dust around her feet. She looked at him, but didn't beg, didn't plead, didn't seem to want anything except, maybe, stop walking. Then she opened her mouth, but not to speak of hunger, not to speak of her mama, just to say, in a voice barely louder than the wind, "I don't want to walk anymore. I just want to stop." The man didn't answer, not with words, not with a nod. He disappeared into the house. The wooden door creaked shut behind him. Ellie didn't move. Minutes passed, maybe half an hour. She didn't know. Time didn't mean much. Then the same door opened again, and there he was, holding a folded blanket in one arm, and a piece of bread in the other. He walked to the fence, dropped the blanket over it, and without meeting her eyes, said, "Come inside, child. This is your home now." And for the first time since the rain, she felt like the world wasn't ending anymore. The door didn't creak when she pushed it open. Oh, the house inside was still. The kind of still that doesn't wait for anything. No ticking clocks, no barking dogs. It's just the fire cracking inside the stone hearth and the smell of old wood and beans on the stove. Ellie stepped inside slowly, careful not to drag dirt over the floorboards. Not because she feared punishment, just out of instinct. Like someone entering a church that hadn't seen worship in years. The man had already turned his back. He stood at the stove, stirring something thick and brown in a dented pot. Without turning, he spoke again, voice low and scratchy, like it hadn't been used in weeks. Water's there in the basin. Dry blanket on the chair. That floor by the fire's warm. That was it. No name, no questions. No, where are you from, little one? Or, where's your family? Just space, warmth. Silence. Ellie didn't speak either. She went to the basin, dipped her hands in the cool water, and wiped her face. Then she dried herself with a corner of the blanket he left out, knelt by the fire, and sat. The soup took a long time. Or maybe it just felt that way. When it was ready, he poured it into a chipped bowl and placed it near her, along with a heavy spoon. She whispered, almost afraid to break the quiet. Thank you. He nodded once, then sat in the chair by the window and watched the fields outside. There are men who talk to fill space, and there are men who say nothing, because everything they ever needed to say was already taken from them. The tea was the tea, second kind. 4 hours, the two of them shared the same room, breathing the same dry air, saying nothing. Ellie didn't ask for a name, and he didn't offer one. She watched him as he removed his boots with care, placed them by the door, poured himself black coffee from a battered tin pot, and sat, again like clockwork, that had no reason to keep time anymore. That night, he laid out a second blanket, closer to the fire. He didn't point to it. Kay just unfolded it, left it there, and walked into the back room, shutting the door behind him. Ellie curled up. She didn't cry. Not that night. Her mama's handkerchief was still in her hair, tied tight, like armor. Some people grieve loud. Some make noise, throw things, wail into the heavens. But then there are those like Ellie. We grieve by simply surviving. In the morning, she was still there. Not a dream, not a ghost. Just a girl in borrowed warmth, staring at a wall of quiet wood. She woke before the man. She could hear him shifting in the room beyond. His boots hit the floor with 2 slow thuds. He stepped out without saying a word and let the stove. Breakfast was dry biscuits and cold pork. He left her half. She ate slow. Outside, the world was still damp from the storm, but alive. Birds, dust, horses shaking rain from their coats. After they ate, he stood at the door, glancing toward the fence. Chores, he said. No one else to do them. And then, without looking back, he walked out. Ellie followed. The girl didn't ask what needed doing. She just watched, waited, and copied him, step for step. Quiet as breath, he fed the horses. She brought the hay. He checked the fencing. She carried the nails. He poured water for the hens. She gathered the eggs. No one spoke. No one needed to buy. Midday, he sat on the porch, a piece of tobacco pressed to his lip, a tin cup resting on his knee. She sat on the steps, arms around her legs, staring at the sky. You got a name? He finally asked, not looking at her. Ellie hesitated. Ellie? Long silence. Yours? She asked back. He shifted in the chair, then shrugged. Ain't used it much lately. That was all he said. She didn't ask again. That night, he brought out a second plate without a word, set it on the table, motioned toward the seat. Ellie sat. They ate slow, together, like people who hadn't shared a table with anyone in a long, long time. And later, As she lay again on the floor by the fire, something broke loose inside her. Just a crack, just enough. One tear, then two, then all of them. She pressed her face into the blanket and shook. She didn't make a sound. Just let it out. All the silence, all the weight, all the miles and smoke and dead things she'd carried like stones in her pockets. Asterisk, and in the back room, the man didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands on his knees, eyes open, listening to grief, knowing it by heart. Next morning, Ellie woke to find a small dress folded neatly beside her. Not new, but clean. There was also a note, 3 words, scribbled in crooked pencil. It might fit. She pressed the fabric to her chest and stood there for a long time. Not sure if she was allowed to smile, but she did. Just a little asterisk somewhere between the soup, the silence, and that second blanket by the fire. A door had opened. Not a big one, not one with a key, right, but the kind of door only 2 broken things can walk through together. The day settled into something that looked like routine, but wasn't quite peace. Every morning, Ellie woke before the sun and stepped into the cold kitchen, where he'd already boiled water and left it by the basin. There was always a biscuit on the counter, wrapped in cloth. Some days there were 2. She dressed in the same brown dress he'd given her and tied her hair back like her mama used to, with the faded blue ribbon she'd managed to save during the storm. It was frayed now, but it still held. They worked side by side. He never asked her to do anything, but he never stopped her either. She fed the chickens. She brushed the horses. She even climbed halfway into the barn rafters one morning to scare off a nest of blackbirds that had taken to stealing grain. He had only looked up once, said, "Careful," then went back to stacking hay that night. He read the same book over and over. Ellie didn't know the title. He never read it out loud. He just sat in the same corner chair, legs stretched out, boots off, the fire lighting his face while she lay wrapped in her blanket on the floor nearby. She started to speak more, only a little. Small things. There's a hole in the fence. South side. Okay? Tried to ride her? Just slow. Did you plant all them trees yourself? Sometimes he'd answer. Sometimes he'd just grunt. But the silence between them no longer felt hollow. It was something else now. Something almost soft, but the door in the back hall remained closed. The third door. The one that didn't lead to the kitchen or the man's room. The one with the old iron knob and the paint that had faded to a dull gray, like it had forgotten what color it was meant to be. She passed by it every day. Once, she touched the handle. It was cold. One evening after supper, she asked, "What's in that room?" Didn't look up from his book. Didn't blink. Didn't move. "Nothing worth remembering," he said. Then he stood, put the book down, and went outside without another word. Ellie didn't ask again. Not because she was afraid, but because she already knew. It was 2 weeks later when the letter came. A boy on a pony from the post office in Dry Creek. Dust, covered and chewing. On a stem of grass. "Mr. Alder?" he asked, stepping down. The man took the envelope, stared at the seal, then tucked it into his vest pocket without opening it. He didn't speak the rest of the day. Just worked the fence until his knuckles bled. Ellie didn't press him. But that night, long after he thought she'd fallen asleep, she heard the creak of the back room door, and for the first time, she saw what lay behind it. She crept down the hall barefoot, the boards cold beneath her toes, and peeked around the corner. Just as the door eased open, inside, moonlight spilled across a wooden floor scattered with toys. A wooden train, a tiny rocking horse, a crib that hadn't held a child in many years. On the wall was a photo worn black and white, edges curled with time, a woman and a child. The child looked about Ellie's age, maybe younger. He stood there, staring at it, shoulders square, back stiff, like someone holding his breath inside a grave. She saw him press the letter to his lips, then drop it into the small stove beside the door and strike a match. The flames took it in seconds. He didn't speak, didn't cry, just watched the fire eat the paper like it was the only thing he had left to burn. Ellie stepped back quietly, returned to the hearth, and didn't say a word when he came out. The next morning, Key handed her a new pair of boots. "Yours now," he said. She nodded and tried not to cry. Spring crept in slow, painting the trees with soft green and chasing the cold from the earth. Ellie grew taller. Her cheeks filled in. Her voice didn't tremble when she spoke anymore. She rode the horses without asking. She knew how to fix a fence, clean a rifle, and track the coyotes that came sniffing too close to the barn. The ranch changed with her dot flowers. Returned near the porch. He built a swing, said nothing about it, just left it hanging from the old oak out front. She found it one morning and sat there till sunset. Sometimes they'd sit together after supper and drink hot tea. He started reading. Aloud, only a page, maybe two. His voice slow, quiet, like a man learning how to speak again after too long in silence. Once, she asked his name again. Not like before, not a child asking a stranger, but like someone asking a friend for something she already halfway knew. "Clay," he said. Then he added, as if it surprised him too, "Clayton Alder." He didn't ask for her last name. She never gave it. There was no need. But peace doesn't live long on dust roads. It was the second week of May when the sheriff came riding hard up the trail. Dust on his coat, blood on his sleeve, and eyes that didn't blink when he looked down at Ellie playing with the pup near the barn. Clay met him halfway, his shotgun resting loosely in one hand. "Riders," the sheriff said, "coming through Dry Creek. 4 of them. Mean bastards. Shot old Pete Matlock just to take his mare." Clay didn't move. "Word is they're headed west," the sheriff added. "I'd pass this way by dusk." Ellie had stopped playing. She stood now, one hand on the pup, watching the 2 men. "Thank you, Sheriff," Clay said. The lawman nodded and turned back toward his horse. Clay didn't go inside. He didn't speak to Ellie. He just walked around the ranch once, checking the gates, the locks, the feed bins. Then he returned to the porch, sat in the chair, and placed the shotgun across his knees. Ellie sat beside him when the sun dipped behind the hills. He turned to her. "If they come," he said, "you go into that back room and don't open the door until I say." She didn't argue. He stood, rested a hand on her shoulder. Then he looked her in the eyes and said something she didn't expect. "You were never a burden, okay?" That night, she waited in the back room, behind the crib and the locked chest, listening to every creak of the porch, every gust of wind. No riders came, but something had shifted. A storm was near. Spring's slow bloom turned into summer's harsh sun. The ranch, once quiet and dusty, had begun to breathe again. Ellie had grown stronger, more certain, her laughter rare but genuine. Clay had found a strange comfort in her presence. The silence between them now, filled with a fragile hope, but the world outside was not ready to forgive. One hot afternoon, as the sun burned low, the sound of hooves kicked up dust down the trail. Ellie was in the field, gathering wildflowers, when she spotted them for riders. Key and hard-faced, eyes burning with the same cold that had haunted the valley for years. Clay saw them too, standing tall, with his shotgun resting against the porch post. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of a storm when he said, "They've come for trouble." Ellie didn't flinch. She remembered his warning, the promise in his eyes, and quietly slipped inside the house. The riders approached the gate, her horses snorting and stamping. Clay stepped forward, his figure steady and unyielding. "I told you," he said, voice low and steady. "This land don't belong to those who bring violence." A shot cracked the dry air, then another. The fight was fierce, the dust swirling like ghosts in the fading light. Ellie watched from the backroom window, heart pounding, clutching the blanket her mother had worn. Hours later, silence returned. The riders lay still in the dust. Their threat ended. Clay's breath came heavy as he walked back inside, wiping sweat and blood from his brow. He found Ellie waiting by the fire, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe," he said softly, "and you're home." For the first time, Ellie smiled without hesitation. The storm had come and passed, but it left behind something stronger, a bond forged not by blood, but by survival and trust. They were no longer two broken souls wandering alone. They were a family,